My name is Claude Hendrickson. I'm a accredited community-led housing advisor. I am also a community land trust ambassador. But I've been active in my community since I was about 14 in Chapeltown, Leeds. I'm of the first generation of young people that was born here. My mother came here in 1958 and I was born in 1960, so I'm of the first of that Windrush generation children. So we've had to tackle all of the issues that come with a settling group of people in the UK. And housing obviously was one of the issues we had to tackle. Education, employment, training, all of them issues over the years, health and well-being, we've had to tackle all of them. So I've been active in my community for over 40 years, tackled lots of issues, different issues, policing the community, health services, activities to the community. Even birds and bees and the animals, housing is essential. Having a roof over your head is a natural situation. So yes, in the 60s, living in England, one of the first things I think I would say became evident to me is postal discrimination. Areas of the country and areas of the city that had been discriminated against because postally. And we lived in the time when there was no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. So housing was essential. And our parents came to England and they were knocking on doors and they were shutting doors, saying no rooms here, knocking doors, shutting doors. Nobody would give them a room. So our parents struggled in the 60s with housing. I remember when I was a young child moving merely every 6 months. You know, you'd have an accommodation and then there'd be issues and you'd move, and not understanding as a child why we moved so much, which didn't give you no stability as a child. You know, you could go to school and come home and your mom say, oh, well, we're moving. You know, we're packing your bags and you're moving again. So my experience, and I'll go with my experience within housing in the UK, it was quite strange that we lived in streets where there was lots of dereliction, where there was the house next door might be derelict, nobody lives in it, because when the migrating people moved into a house, the indigenous people moved out. They left you, and so you was always chasing good housing, and you were getting the worst housing. I lived in some terrible housing up until I was 11 years old. And 11 years old was the first time as a child in England I had a proper house with a bath and upstairs and downstairs. We'd been living up until then as a family, like 6 of us living in one bedroom, you know, and that's how I'd lived up until I was 11 years old. It was the first time I had a bedroom where I just shared with my brother. So housing has been fundamental to empowering people, or a sense of being happy, because you're happy when you've got a home. When you've got a house, you can make it a home. When you make it a home, you become happy. And no matter what's going on outside of the house, you've got that safe haven. So yeah, that was my first experience of housing. And then after the riots of 1975 in the UK, that was when my generation was coming of age. At 75, I was 15 years old now. We was coming of age, and we had up and down England, and I didn't know people in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester. There were social uprisings because of negative policing. We were getting herded by the police and treated really bad. And then it wasn't until the riots of or the civil unrest of 1981 when Margaret Thatcher came into power. That was the first female prime minister. She came into power in 1979, and by 81 there had been mass uprisings of these migrating communities again. And the issues were housing, the issues were better education for children, the issues were better types of jobs, the issues was equality. People were looking for equality, you know, an equal right for your children to go to school, an equal right for your children to get a good education, an equal right to get a good house. And remember, even with the Windrush generation, we were actually citizens, but treated like migrants, you know. So I've had that experience, and I understand it, and I don't want, I speak to my children about it. I don't want going forward to see that happen. You still believed when you came home you could be thrown out. You didn't know, you didn't have that certainty. It's only come about since we had uprisings. And I'll be honest, and you can film this, I see Britain in the coming years having major civil unrest because of these people who want to settle, want to contribute, and they're not given the opportunity, just like we had to. 20 years later, 30 years later, they said, oh, sorry, you've been citizens all the time. After I've gone through 30 years of racism, discrimination, the hostile environment. Oh, sorry, you were actually citizens. You know, what we did was wrong. And yet I feel it in the air right now. You know, the number of young people that are on the streets of the United Kingdom now are engaged, disaffected Eastern European and migrating children from Africa and all of these places. And they will feel like I felt in 1975, and they'll feel like there's no other option but to fight and to stand up for equal rights, stand up for housing, stand up for education, stand up for the opportunity to have a job, stand up for the opportunity to contribute, because that's what we all want to do. We all want to contribute. We don't want to be outside. We want to contribute. If you want me to go to work, tell me what you want me to do, but don't just leave me on the street when there's work I could be doing. And because of my papers, you won't let me have work. And at that same time, they created black housing associations around the country. And that was because one of the biggest issues amongst the migrated people of that time was housing. Major problem. And yeah, so again, there was the opportunity. Housing became the beacon for unifying people. Black Housing Association started building housing where black people would get the first choice of refusal, which gave you a chance to start building communities and you know, having proper neighbours. So yeah, that was 81. Housing associations came along. They were going to deliver affordable housing. They were going to deliver social housing. But what happened was, and when, with that social housing, they promised that when they were building these houses, that the black men, the ethnic minority men, would get jobs. Now, what happened was these housing associations started to build houses, but when you looked on the building sites, there were no men of colour. There was no people of colour. There was no migrants on the building sites, which actually was probably the first moment when I felt something is really not right here, and I want to be involved in changing the narrative. And that's when I kind of went on this journey of saying, well, if amongst the black people, black men, there's high unemployment, and there's high dereliction of houses, and you're going to build new houses, doesn't it make sense to train these people to help you build these houses?
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like part of the catalyst that got me moving. And I'd been involved in campaigning about inequalities of police brutality and other things. But then what happened was I saw a program on TV about a project in Bristol called Zanzili, where a group of unemployed young black men had built a block of houses, a block of flats in Bristol, and they were going to get them. And that became my inspiration. That's when that light was turned on for me about, could I be involved in changing the narrative of one, that black men were lazy, or the migrant men were lazy, didn't want to work. And you've got to remember, the building site is probably one of the most dangerous places you can be. So, because things drop on you. So, you know, when you're dealing with racism on a building site, very dangerous for the migrating people. So yeah, so that's how my journey started into community-led housing, that I wanted to take these unemployed men, give them the skills that they could fix these houses and then live in them, or other people could live in them. And I thought it didn't seem like rocket science to me. It sort like really logical. I put together a group of unemployed young men, myself included. I'd been unemployed for about 8 years. And I got a group together and we managed to access the funding. It took us, we started out on the journey in 1988, and we got on our building site in 1993. So it took 4 or 5 years of lobbying, arguing, jumping over hurdles, to get it. But March the 23rd, 1993, we laid our first brick on site. And 18 months later, we had laid 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, 8,000 roof tiles, to give you a feel of what we'd done. And we'd built 12 houses, one for each of the members of the group. So we completed them in the back end of 1994, early 1995.
Wow.
And
where was that?
They're in the Ravenscar area of Leeds, which is up round Hay Road, in a predominantly white area, quite a conservative area. But yeah, we got a lot of resistance when we was building them as well. But I think everybody became very proud of what we achieved, and that was like I said, 1994. So that's almost 23, 24 years ago. My journey went on further because then I became a member of the Community Self-Build Agency, which was a group that had set themselves up to be the voice of community self-build. And the Community Self-Build Agency, we had groups in the north of England, Sunderland, Newcastle, Wallsend. We had groups in Manchester, Liverpool. We had groups in Bristol. We had groups in London, Brighton. We had groups all over. That was under the umbrella of the Community Self-Build Agency. And yeah, that was a good time. We were lobbying, banging the drum. So I've personally been banging the drum for community-led housing for over 20 years on my own, as a lone person of colour.
Yeah.
Because the community-led housing sector is really predominantly educated, middle-class white people. They're the ones that know about it. poor white people that I grew up with in the postally discriminated communities that I grew up with, they didn't know about it. They also were living in dereliction. So when I finished Frontline, my initial idea was to go back to these poor white areas and help them. And what kept me energized was these people in London that were setting up the community self-build agency, and they were calling me and coming and can I help in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Bristol. And we went on to do a number of self-build projects in Bristol that were for ex-military men, because they were homeless. They'd become homeless. And what happened is, so we started a project of specifically aimed at veterans that were sleeping on the streets in Bristol. And we did a number of projects like that. And they kept that drum going. And then as well, I was working back in the community, working with young people, because I wanted to work with young people. And so yeah, and then I went and worked for the College of Building, trying to keep vocation and construction skills on the agenda and give the opportunity to females and give the opportunity to migrating children. And for me, one of my greatest findings in the last 2 years was that the community land trust comes out of the civil rights movement of America. So the Black Panthers, the Malcolm X's, the civil rights movement in America is where the community land trust network, where the strategy came from. It came to Europe through Denmark and through Sweden and through Europe, and then it's come to England. So when I found that out, it was very enlightening and very heartening for me to know that actually this thing I'm part of actually comes out of the movement of people that I'm from. So so I found that fantastic.
In this long time that you've been involved in different ways with community-led housing, what do you see as similar and what do you see as different? Like, what things have changed in the sector, if we want to call it the community-led sector, and what things do you feel are the same?
The biggest thing is that all of the different strands of community-led housing were living in silos. So UK co-housing would be over there, cooperatives would be over there, self-build would be over there, empty homes program would be over there. They would all be in their little silos, blinkers on. The Walter Siegel Trust, everybody was just looking after their own. What has been amazing for me is what the Community Housing Fund, under the auspice of the Community Land Trust Network, has done. It has created these 26, 27 hubs that are umbrellaed by it. And within that 26, 27 hubs, some might be doing co-housing, some might be doing cooperatives, some might be doing self-build, but it's under the umbrella. And they appreciate, one of the great things for me is they're now appreciating that speaking together as a movement is and so that is the one thing that I've come back and I've seen. I said, fantastic. This training of people to become community-led housing advisors, people that were in projects as well as people that work within the housing fraternity. I think that's fantastic. I think they have something like 130, 540 accredited advisors across the UK. Is brilliant, and they're still training more. The negative is still that it is still a predominantly educated white middle class network, fraternity. What I do accept is that they are willing to listen, they're willing to open the doors, they're being more open, they're trying to share good practice. But it's still the same kinds of some people like the people that are involved to look like them and think like them, and it's not necessarily true. So they're the negatives, that it's still kind of educated, academically middle class white people. Yeah, there's some good people in there that are trying to make it more inclusive. You know, one of the things that's missing within the network, which I'm working on with them, is an equality, diversity and inclusion policy. Every single organization, every single group should have an equality, inclusion and diversity policy to ensure, not just about race, about women fleeing domestic violence, about people with disability, about LGBTQ people. All organizations need to have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy, and that's what I'm driving. That's what I want to see change. I think the community-led housing sector can look at issues like homelessness, look at issues like ex-offenders, because these are not massive numbers, they're small numbers in society. And I think even the problem around migrants and housing, I think the community-led sector is in a better position to look at and tackle them than mainstream housing. I think we're in a better place. I think what we have to do is get government to understand, let us deal with that. You get on with the 23,000 or the 15,000. Let the community-led sector look at that issue, and maybe look at temporary housing that we could give people for 5 years. But the government needs to then ring fence money. So I think, and I'm advocating for maybe 5 to 10% of the annual housing budget to go to community-led housing. So community-led housing can look at these issues and how it tackles them. And at local authority level, the same thing, 5 to 10% of housing budgets here. Because I think the sector can tackle that, because we're small enough and we can have the personal link, because we're not great big housing associations or great big local authority. I think we can look at them specialist things and we can tackle them. And the second side of my experience with housing was that a lot of the men folk that came from the Caribbean, they had construction skills. Because what I realized in life later on, that if you live in the Caribbean or Africa or them kind of so-called developing countries, no matter what you did as a vocation, occupation, you had to help in the building of your house. In Britain, they have a very strange mentality where what they tell you is, you in need of housing, go and wait in that queue. And what happened for me was a lot of the men that came from the Caribbean actually were joiners, plumbers, painters and decorators, builders. But in Britain, they couldn't, even though there was a house there, it was derelict, they couldn't go in there and fix it up, which was a kind of crazy situation where they had the skills as migrants or people who'd migrated here, but they couldn't use the skills. They had to go and work on the buses, or they had to go and work in iron making foundries, furnace foundries. But they had skills as tradesmen. They came here as tradesmen, but they couldn't use them skills. One of the first things I wanted to do was tackle migration, because we have a lot of projects in Leeds that are dealing with people that are homeless and are undocumented. So because they don't have documentation in the UK, they can't get jobs, they can't get housing. So it was that we've got a project called RETAS. I'm part of their network. I'm part of the the refugees movement network and homelessness group, where what we're looking at is how we can empower migrating people. And many of these migrating people that don't have documentation have trade skills. They've already got construction skills, but they sat there and they can't work. But, you know, so it was about how can I engage with them. So I'm working with a number of agencies that work with people, some documented, some undocumented, to how they can be involved in helping solve their housing problem. It's very hard because a lady might be documented, but her husband's not documented. And because he's not documented, he can't get into meaningful employment. In fact, he can't even get meaningful accommodation. So on the back of her accommodation, he has accommodation, but he can't get work. So I'm working now, I've got about 3 groups that I'm working with in Leeds that are some documented, some undocumented. But again, what's happened now is because England has come out of the European Union and Brexit, there's issues that are impacting now on people. Now they've got flights where they're taking people back and deportation flights. And so that is breaking up. But I'm still looking, I'm still working around my people undocumented, and hoping that within the next year or so they'll get their documentation. We've got people, Eastern Europeans that are here, people from Africa that have got European citizenship. So we've got they might have been born in France, born in Germany, born in Holland, born in Belgium. So they were born under the European flag and have now come to England because they were under the European flag. But now Britain has come out of Europe. Their status is being questioned, whereas before they could get a British passport based on the fact they were a member of Europe, but now they're not. So there's a lot of fear going on and there's a lot of uncertainty. But I'm going to keep banging away with that because, again, like I said, Britain complains that it needs more construction workers. It needs more people with skills. Lots of these migrating people have got them skills. So why are we not tying the skills up with our need and stop persecuting them? Because, you know, people don't, and I often say this, people don't leave where they live to travel and walk and risk their life to come somewhere else for fun. They do it because there is a need, there's a change in situation where they've lived. So that's where I'm at. So with community-led housing, that's where it's taken me now. It's housing unit centered. It's about, I mean, in Leeds, for example, they have a waiting list of something like 23,000 people. And then they have empty houses. They may have 4,000 or 5,000 empty houses stood there doing nothing. And they may have certain parts of the area city derelict. And then they've got new building sites happening. And they've got all these people, putting them in detention centres and what?
Enormously substandard, like inhumane conditions.
It's crazy. And for me, it's like they're people. You know, they, like I constantly say, they haven't migrated to end up in a detention centre because they're happy about it.
Of course not.
You know, they've migrated because of issues around climate change, issues around war, issues around bad government. Because, you know, that's why they've migrated. I've watched in England how, and remember England or United Kingdom, when our parents came here, they were already Eastern Europeans, the Polish, the Yugoslavians, the Serbians, the Latvians. They were already here. They'd already helped Britain rebuild after the Second World War. Now, and then time had come and they started returning home. And then with the breakdown of Europe, some of them have come back. And the way they're being treated, but I can take you around most cities in Leeds and you'll find Polish clubs, Latvian clubs, Serbian clubs. So that shows the evidence that they were here before. And they contributed to rebuilding this country. But now they're migrants this time round. It's really quite... And I'm seeing that now with Caribbean people and people from Africa. And I often say, you know, people don't flee where they live. People want to be at home. If you could, I mean, it's like diverse weather. Diverse weather comes like you will have seen in places like Puerto Rico and places like that, which devastate communities. So they have to move. They never wanted to move. They were happy living where they were. Even in Venezuela and places like that, natural climate issues happen that people have to move. Now, the way they're treated on the other side of that is inhumane. And I struggle to deal with it. And I'm sorry, you know, people in England may be upset by this term. People in Britain are travelling all over the world.
Yeah,
the young students, they're travelling all over the world and living in all parts of the world. But when that devastation happens, they can come back to England. But the people they've lived with and who've looked after them, and they can't come. And I travel the world. I've been to Americas, I've been to the Caribbean, I've been to parts of Africa, I've been to parts of Europe. And... you know, Norway, Sweden and them places. And I'm amazed at the way they look at housing and they look at keeping people together. In West Yorkshire, they need to build 120,000 houses over the next 10 years. 120,000. That means you need construction workers. You need builders. You need people that you can train. If you don't do now, what's going to happen? The opportunity is there. Look at it as an opportunity, not as a negative. Don't have a negative slant. Look for the positivity. If we can train some of these people, they will build houses. They will build houses. They will be paid a wage. If they're paid a wage, they will take that wage and spend it in the local shop. It's not rocket science. It's a circle.